Welcome to the Foothills, a Colorado lifestyle and real estate podcast featuring mountain home real estate broker Robert Martin, who has over 25 years of experience assisting clients reach their goals and move forward. Tune in each week for a dynamic conversation with experts, Colorado adventurers, and residents that explores the ins, outs, and specific nuances of buying the perfect mountain home or selling your dream home in Evergreen, Conifer, Bailey, and surrounding areas to catch a glimpse into the Colorado lifestyle that's a part of you.
Welcome to the podcast. Today, our guest is Kerry Poppe. Kerry, thanks for joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. Enjoying the cool weather.
Yes, indeed. It's a nice break. One thing I've noticed too, Kerry, is we've gotten those late showers, or those afternoon showers we used to get years ago. It seemed like we didn't get last year or the year before, but those are welcome as well.
Yes, they're very welcome. They can be just a tad bit deceiving when it comes to watering. It's not going to take care of all of your watering needs. So we think, I'll get a reprieve from watering. You still need to check because some things have a very dense canopy, whether it's a shrub or a tree, and it could not allow some water to get all the way through. So you still better check.
Yeah, a little deceiving. It feels good to watch, but if you got new grass or something, you want to keep an eye on that, I would imagine. So tell me a little bit about yourself and your background, Kerry.
Certainly. I've had the what we call the bug of gardening put in me from years ago. I grew up in Arvada, and my mother was an avid gardener. She enjoyed planting flowers, and from there I kind of springboarded into vegetable gardening. I was a student at Warren Tech for their horticulture program. I was always very close to gardening, vegetables, pretty much anything, houseplants included. Some people specialize in just houseplants. I kind of have a broad experience. I know that they sent you my biography about my great grandfather, who was a gardener for Balmoral Castle. So you could kind of say it's in my roots. I come from an Irish Scottish background. So yes, they can grow potatoes. It's just when there's certain monocultures get attacked by insects or diseases that wipes things out, and that's what happens. So yes, the Irish can grow potatoes. It was not their fault. Just put a little history in there. And so just having my own home for as many years as I have had, always been growing plants. I did get my education, my upper education in education for elementary. Been a master gardener since 1987. Things like I have a landscape certification, a sustainable management certification. I'm a Colorado certified nursery professional and part of the ALCC, which is the Association of Landscape Contractors of Colorado. So I'm well hooked into the industry. So I am always apprised of the different things that are going on in our local landscape from a government level, because that does apply to us and all to homeowners. So I'm kind of stay on top of those things. It's important to me. It's important to my clients that I work with, and also with the communities that I work with through the Master Gardener program.
Well, that's great. We'll have a lot of good information to share. Do you remember going back what you grew in your first garden?
I have. It's interesting that you ask. Radishes, and most anybody can grow radishes. I grew corn, which was kind of gutsy for someone in elementary school. And I have a photograph of my Scottish grandfather standing in the middle of my little cornfield in Arvada, standing in the cornfield, and he was probably about 5'10" or so. So it's a pretty proud moment until the squirrels got into it and ate the corn. So you learn the good, the bad, and the ugly with gardening at a young age.
That would be a tough thing to grow. You need a lot of water, and keep an eye on it for sure. So you've taught horticulture classes at elementary and in high school. And why is it important, do you think, for school kids to learn about horticulture?
I just think it's important that they see how biology and botany works, that where our plants come from something very small. The old adage about large trees come from, small acorns. To be part of that process, there's a certain amount of nurturing that is involved with caring for nature, caring for the plants. I think it imparts patience, persistence. You have to have a pretty thick skin when a hailstorm comes through, or a disease or insect damage comes through, and all your efforts are now down to nothing. We call it becomes compost at that point.
Mm-hmm.
It builds some integrity and character, just working the soil, working with the plants. It isn't always for the faint-hearted, and change is always happening in the garden, in the landscape. And I use both of those interchangeably, gardening and landscaping. Some people think, the little old grandma with her flowers in her garden. But we've seen in the past couple years that many, many people have gotten bit by the gardening bug, and certainly re-landscaping. Seen a lot of that in the past couple years. Caught most of us by surprise in the industry. So much so we weren't prepared with plant material. As numbers are based on kind of a steady quantity that people are going to use from year to year. But then when everybody was quarantined, what do? You garden. And we saw that.
That's right.
Yeah.
I noticed that too. A lot of people started going to Home Depot and decided to change different things in their home because we did spend a lot of time
Well,
there.
you think of the stories about the locusts coming in and chewing down all the plants. We'll just think of, the quarantine did that to the industry. Everybody came in and scooped up a lot of the larger plant species that take multiple years to grow. So there isn't a backup quantity to make up for everything that was bought. And so now we're kind of in a lag until some of that larger plant material comes to maturity to plant, because some people have the ability to plant larger species, but we have to wait for them to grow. So that's kind of where we ended up in the industry.
Now, are you seeing, Kerry, across the city a lot more xeriscaping? I know there are some restrictions on watering, especially in the city municipalities.
And we will continue to see that. I always, just reading a lot of the reports and staying on top of what's going on, and knowing that it's not a trend, because there are some things in the industry. When I talk about industry, I'm talking about horticulture, landscape gardening, that are trends, and trends can come and go. But unfortunately, the water is not a trend. It is a reality. So we are seeing more need for the xeric. And I think the biggest thing is for people to be more aware of what their irrigation systems can and cannot do. And that it's not just a set amount of water, because your garden too is changing, your landscape is changing, especially with a lot of the restrictions. Sometimes those irrigation systems are not matched to what's going on. Xeric plants, first couple seasons, they need ample water, not flooded, but ample water to get those roots established. And then at that point, the irrigation starts to back off, and there's only supplemental watering. And supplemental means if there's been an extended dry period. But once they're rooted in and established, it's amazing how many of those xeric and native plants don't want really rich soil and don't want a lot of water. You just bring in, what happens is you get a very leggy, unhealthy plant, and they do something we call splay. They just fall apart in a big wind or a big rain, and then they're just laying on the ground. And then everybody starts to dislike xeric plants very much because they're getting too much water, and they weren't right species for the right type of a garden.
Is that because, Kerry, when you first start to water it, you don't really get to the water in the root ball? It maybe you water it and it waters around and it just runs down, and you're not really getting to the roots? Is that possibly?
Right. If you're hand watering, it's easier to do concentric circle watering, kind of start in the middle and work your way out, because the roots are going to start to move outwards. But that root ball in the middle is still fairly tight with roots because they've been growing in a container. And until they start pushing out into the soil strata, the middle still has to have water, and so does the outside area where those roots are going to go, because they're going to just absorb the moisture as soon as those roots grow out there. So that moisture has to be available for them to get to. So it's a concentric Same with, I'm a big proponent of like a slow drip
Mhm.
system, because especially with the flexible hoses, because you can kind of put a concentric circle around them. And at least for the first couple of years, that gets everything nice and even and consistent, and then that can be backed off. Overhead, I think we lose a lot more water with overhead watering. And so it's just, we have to look at different irrigation methods if people are going to be restricted or choose to do more xeric type of planting. And it's a different look. Xeric planting is a totally different visual in the landscape. I was talking to David Salmon at one of the Plant Select conferences a couple years ago. He has since passed away this year. He was the founder, the owner of High Country Gardens, which works a lot with xeric type plants. And I remember talking to him, I said, but I really like my peonies, and I like some of these things that are not xeric. And he said, well, if you will plant 80% xeric or water-wise plants, you can have 20% of what you call old world or old country type of plants. Your things that are more leafy deciduous that require a little bit more water. So I thought that was a good compromise. I got permission from the expert.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. I think, in the foothills, most people are conservation conscious when it comes to water. And the way you describe watering is, it's certainly, you want to keep that mindset when you're watering, but you also want your plants to survive. So important considerations when planting in the foothills, Kerry, what considerations you think should be taken for higher altitudes, deer and animal resistant plants? What are some specific plant recommendations for deer, elk resistant, drought tolerant plants that do well in higher elevations?
Sure. So an easy way to think about it is and because we're talking high altitude as well, plants that tend to be more in a high altitude will have smaller leaf structure. It takes a lot of energy for a plant and smaller blooms, smaller fruiting, because the higher you go, is about every 1,000 feet is a 10-degree variance. So when you're going from mile high, 5280, and then you jump up to 6,000 or 7,000, you're getting cooler. The season's getting shorter. The plants aren't going to put out a lot of energy to put big leaves and big flowers like you see at a lower altitude. It takes a lot of energy and a lot of water to create something like that. So you'll see more of that at a higher altitude. When you're thinking xeric, you're thinking more in the gray, green, blue-green hues in leaf structure. Colors, you'll have your yellows and purples and in reds and cuts. So you still have some of that spectrum, but the leaf structure is going to be different. So if you look at Kendrick Lake Park, right there off of Jewel and Garrison, and you walk through there, you do see a lot of gray-green foliage. That is a plant's, when it's a lighter color, it reflects the light rather than absorb it. And so it's not going to desiccate quite the same if it was a darker leaf or a larger leaf when we run into what we call our drought or our watering restrictions. That's something to look for. A shorter season, certainly a shorter season. Every 1,000 feet you go up, you're losing at least a couple weeks at a time. When I do my talk on high altitude gardening, everything's shifted by almost an entire month. So if you like lilacs blooming down here, when lilacs bloom at the lower altitude, just wait and go up another month and you get to see them again in bloom and enjoy them. You just go up, a couple 1,000 feet. And I work with a lot of people, clients and certainly master gardener participants who want the same thing that you have at a lower altitude that you have at a higher altitude. And sometimes that's not as possible. It takes a lot of hunting to find plant material that will do that. Sometimes you have to look at some of the plants coming out of Canada. You're at a higher, just a colder climate. That takes a lot of sleuthing and whether it's going to survive. You just kind of have to have a different mindset when you're at a high altitude. You're going to have a different plant palette. If you're going to do anything lower altitude at a high altitude, it will then, I always call it becomes a pet. It'll have to have extra mulch. It'll have to have a sheltered area. Maybe it'll only ever be a container type of plant, and then it has to stay in a cool garage till you can bring it out in the summer. So that's kind of the 80-20. Go 80 of your proper plant material and do your 20% of something that's ornamental that you'd like to have that you miss at a lower altitude, but you're going to have to treat it like a pet to get it from season to season. You got to take care of it. You just can't put it out there and say, okay, you'll find out the following spring that it didn't make it.
Are there any of that stick out, Kerry, that are your favorites? I mean, if you were going to design or recommend different types of plants that might be deer resistant, drought tolerant, are there any that stick out that do well then an elevation above like 7,500 feet?
Oh, above 75. That would be a favorite. Yeah, because I garden at, I'm just, well, I told you where I live. So
Yeah.
I'm probably about 5,400, 5,500. So not a higher elevation. One that does really well, I'm trying to think.
I know I see a lot of Russian sage around. That's really a pretty.
They are
pretty plant.
extremely hardy. And so a lot of people will see them and they like the sun and they
Mhm.
like poor soil, because we know in a higher elevation, it's more of the what we call fractured granite. There's not a lot of
Mhm.
organic material in the soil.
Boy, that's true.
So yeah, and there's ways to take care of that. Yeah, and I was thinking the Russian sage. There are several varieties that are what we call a more of a dwarf. The standard Russian sage that we see in the boulevard plantings, because it's more xeric, get to be 4, 5, 6 feet diameter. They can get very huge, but there are a couple of varieties that are smaller, a little more compact, a little bit more upright. They're not going to splay. I wouldn't recommend somebody plant one of these standard sized ones up at a higher altitude. I would go with the petite ones,
Mhm.
because you're getting a smaller plant in a zone that doesn't have a long season. And so it won't
Gotcha.
get floppy. They'll get
Mhm.
floppy looking is what happens. And then nobody likes when they're floppy. The
Mhm.
bees, they're a
Yeah.
great pollinator. Deer don't care for them. They're stinky. Deer don't like things that are stinky. They don't like things that are sticky or spiny. Any of those. If they're really hungry, they will, but they will not chew them up that bad. Anything that looks like salad, they'll eat it. Unfortunately.
That's a good point. I mean, because the deer and the elk, we tried plants that they say deer resistant, but they seem to eat about everything.
Yeah, there is, the extension has some lists. I found one that was really interesting. It's another agriculture university, is Rutgers University. On their website, they list them A through D. And the caveat there is they also list, when you think of where Rutgers University is, they also have plants on that list that don't grow in Colorado, but when I perused that list, there were quite a few that do grow here, but it lists them A to D, most likely, least likely, absolutely will not touch. It's pages and pages and pages. I also, when I'm talking with clients, kind of make a list. What worked really well, what didn't. Some people say, oh, I planted this, and they leave it alone. And then I'll go to a different area along the foothills and say, oh no, they ate that to the quick. So there are some that are definitely, they won't eat.
They don't.
Barberries. Barberries are a great plant. They're a great shrub, and they spines. They have pretty little red fruit in the fall.
Right.
But,
yeah. We just planted some barberries, and they're doing
very
okay.
plant, yeah.
Yeah. But to your point about, I think the watering, I haven't been watering it in the root ball. I think it's been going down and hasn't really been, because it's starting to fall apart. So
Concentrically
I need to be,
water.
yeah, I need to look at that on the watering part of it. And the deer don't seem to follow the rules. They kind of go with
Not
what
always.
they,
If they're hungry, if they're
do
hungry, it's
whatever.
like the Japanese beetles. We think we know what they like, and then you see them on something else, and you're like, wait a minute. Now this plant is affected. It's the same kind of thing. We just have to be what we call observant scientists, in the garden.
Yeah, like you said, just
scientists to watch what's going on.
take care of things like a pet and really be, aware of what's going on.
Yeah, two of the most important things I was going to share with you is that, one, you got to know your zone and your altitude.
Gotcha.
You have to know your soils. Got to know the soils, because the soil is the foundation for everything that's going to happen above. And also knowing the watering requirements, what needs water. You plant things based on hydrozones. Everything that's xeric needs to be kind of in a xeric area. You don't want to mix non-xeric and xeric. One's going to fail and one's going to thrive, and vice versa. So it's really, you have to be thoughtful because it takes time, energy, and money. And I always say I like to plant once, but not twice, because I haven't followed through with what you need to follow through with planting.
Yeah, it's so true what you said regarding organic material in the soil for the plants, because we built a house a few years ago, and we're adding landscape to the exterior and that sort of thing. And a lot of it is backfill, and there's just not a lot of substance there for the plants to nourish them, I guess. So, we try to add different composts or different mineral materials, with that.
Right. And the thing with compost, which is good because in our clay soils, it helps keep those soil particles, because clay slides together. The compost works its way through. So then you have an area for roots to hang on to grab the nutrition and the moisture. Compost is always in a state of decomposing. So the decomposers that are in the soil that are microbial, and also some of the insects that we classify as decomposers, will continue to break that down. So and then what happens, and those clay particles will come back together. So you may have to, in a couple of years, hopefully, if you've got the compost in there and you're using a good mulch that decomposes as well, that will also keep adding into the soil. So you kind of have to watch that after a couple of years. In higher elevation soils, the fractured granite, it's the same thing. It's almost too porous, and there's not enough of the tilth to hold the nutrients in. It's the same thing. The compost works well either way, but it has to be checked. It's about 2 to 3 period, because people say, oh, I just put it in once. And then, or some people will put it in and not knowing that they really don't need compost. A lot of xeric water-wise plants don't like rich soil. So knowing that plant and saying, oh, I'm going to add compost just to add compost, the plant can't use that, especially if some of those composts are higher in nitrogen. And a lot of those don't need that much nitrogen. You'll end up with a sick, leggy plant.
So definitely know what you're planting, and if there's a possibility that compost may be needed or some other supplement or
It's not a fix it all. It's a specific use product. But people say, oh, I'll just throw that in there. Some soils are great. I know we redid our lawn because it got killed off by clover mites. And my brother-in-law is a horticulturist. And we were thinking, well, we needed to add to the soil. And we checked it, and the soil was fine because there was enough years of grass growing in the dead roots that the soil stayed in a pretty good, healthy range. So we didn't need to add yards and yards and yards of compost. Sometimes it's just a spot treatment to loosen up some bad areas in a lawn or a landscape.
It sounds, real specific for the area, then your soil, and actually, and then
and at the extension, we always recommend, if you're going to do like a brand new garden plot or a brand new landscape, is to have the soil tested. Then you'll know, oh my gosh, this, if you're saying I'm going to build a shrub perennial xeric garden, and you send in the soil sample, they evaluate that, and then they tell you the percentages of the nutrients that are in the soil, and they'll say, you know what, you've got plenty of nitrogen. Don't add any more because you're doing xeric. If you're doing a vegetable garden, it's going to look a little bit different. They'll say it's going to need XYZ nutrients, and this is how you can get those put in. It's very helpful, especially in very large areas. Some people who do large container gardening, it's always good after a number of years to also check out your container soils, because you water them a bit more and it leaches out, and then those macro and micronutrients aren't existent anymore. And a lot of the soilless potting soils don't have that in them. Yeah.
What a great idea. And so you said you would go to the extension to do that? And
the extension, you can go on their website,
and it's the Colorado State Department.
It's extension.colostate.edu, and you go into the search bar and you put in soil testing. There are 4 different documents. One explains what the soil test is. It gives you instructions on how to pull together soil sample. It does get mailed up to CSU. now is an excellent time. Springtime is pretty busy for them, sometimes fall, because they also work with large landscape corporations who have big properties to do, but it's very exact and they'll tell you exactly what you need to do. It's very easy to follow. Some of the local garden center nurseries will have some of the kits. It's just a small vial. It looks like a canning jar, but it's plastic, and the instructions are in there as well. But
Wow,
it's that way you're not throwing good money after bad.
that's great.
Especially
Just
when
like
you're
you said,
renovating.
yeah, everything's so specific. You might as well know exactly what you're dealing with. That's a great idea.
Plant once,
So,
not twice.
yeah, exactly. Well, you touched briefly on your history,
Yes.
your family history. So is that what inspired you to open a landscaping company, or what specifically did?
So I have been in the employ of a local garden center nursery in Littleton, and I did some of that type of work within that company. And as I was starting to get more and more requests outside of their nursery, it made sense. You know, people always say, get to be your own boss. You need to tread very carefully when you say, yeah, I'm going to, hang out my shingle. Yeah, as I always say, yeah, the government knows I exist now as a business. And
Sure.
I officially started my business in October of 2020. Probably not the most ideal, right but it made sense.
was
It's
busy.
one of those, what brings you joy? And it's
Yeah.
true. And as I just, walk back in time in my memories, it's like, I've always been close to my gardening and to plants, and kind of the go-to for the family when anybody has, even had my soon-to-be daughter-in-law from Texas, we need a garden designed. And I went, well, I don't live there and I don't know all the plants, but let me do some research. So I found them some things that would work.
That's awesome. What do you say, Kerry, is the biggest mistake you might see people make when they try to manage their own landscaping, or things that you see that, might be happening again and again, possibly? And
what I see happening again and again, because I'm out there and I do my design, but I do maintenance and install. So my eyes are always on landscapes and what's going on. I think the biggest misnomer was when everyone decided that rock scaping was the way to go. And there's right ways and wrong ways. I've seen some beautiful rock scaped landscapes that's been done very artfully and creatively, but a lot of times it's done incorrectly, and especially weeds will still find their way in, even with the weed fabric and the rocks. Puncture holes in time, soil particles and dust and everything that blows in still work their way in between the rock, and the weeds will find a way. They can be shallow rooted and they have seeds galore. So, and I've seen people take the rocks, screed the rocks, clean it up, put them all back on again. So that's a big project. So I've seen a lot of rockscapes that have just gone bad, and it creates a heat sink. We've got, we think about our sidewalks and our hard faced buildings, the roadways, things like that. Those all create a heat sink. And then you add rock, and that creates another heat sink. We're creating, this higher heat in and around, especially when we get into these hotter days. That affects the humidity in and around your home. It affects any of the other plant material that may be in and around. That's probably the biggest thing that I've seen, because we think it's a quick fix and it's easy.
I would imagine there's probably some grading issues too sometimes when people maybe put the rock to where there's a negative grade or positive grade. Maybe
slide down, slide down the hill, and you see the weed fabric exposed.
What's your favorite thing about living in Colorado, and what do you like to do outside? What are some of your favorite outdoor activities?
I love the Colorado evenings in the summer after it's been a hot day and it cools down. That is the best. The sky is, well, when it's not raining lately, the sky is clear. And I love to hear the crickets in the summer, because then the temperature's just right, the humidity's just right, and there's a coolness and a kind of beautiful stillness and peacefulness. I would say that about Colorado.
Did you see the lightning last night, the storm?
I actually heard it. I got it once in the middle of the night and I just, all the flashing and I could hear it. And I thought, oh, here we go again. And I was at a client's this morning and I swear they are in hail, hard rain alley. And they were last year and I'm maintaining while they're on vacation. And oh my gosh, I'm going to need to call them because it just came at this wicked angle again in their neighborhood.
Yeah, I heard that a couple nights ago. There was hail. Yeah. And last night it was like being in a discotheque. There was just lights everywhere. My wife and I watched for about 30 minutes. So, well, I really appreciate your time, Kerry, and all the information you shared. Is there anything that you'd like to share that I didn't ask you?
Well, we talked about knowing your zone, your soil is important, your irrigation or your watering. I would say to those people who are contemplating or are being required to go xeric is do your homework. Please reach out to the extension because not all xeric plants that grow at a lower altitude will grow at a higher altitude. And there's some excellent resources on the extension, the CSU extension website that will get you going in the right elevation because not all plants are created equal. And I think that would be the biggest thing because there is a big push for that. And it's a whole different kind of planting. It's a whole different kind of look. We want people to be aware of what they're getting into. It's not just
that drought tolerant plant, is really important. And certainly, with water being very important to conserve. So that's great information.
Yeah. Do your homework. It will pay off.
Yeah. Like you said, everything's real specific and there's so much information out there that you can certainly spend some time to get the information that's most effective to be successful
start
with what
small.
you're doing. So.
Yeah, start small if you can. Maybe work up to that, if you got 80% deciduous and only 20% xeric, start to slowly make that change a bit at a time and get used to it. Because if you do it all at once, you could be overwhelmed very easy in a landscape. So starting small, start with a small patch, some xeric plants, and then move into creating more and more as you get familiar with them. Or you hire somebody that's really good at maintaining them and designing it.
So where can people go, Kerry, to find out more about you if they'd like to?
They can email me. It'd be good. My website is down right now. It's under some reconstruction. So I can't get that to you. You won't find it. But it was very lovely. Now I have to rebuild it. Streetside Garden Creations @gmail.com. That's where you can reach me.
All right. Well, that's great. Well, thank you very much, Kerry. I appreciate your time and all the great information.
Good. Thank you so much, Robert. I do appreciate it. And to all your listeners, happy gardening. Keep on growing.
To the Foothills, a Colorado lifestyle and real estate podcast. On the podcast, I interview real estate experts, Colorado adventurers, and residents who enjoy the serenity and lifestyle of living in our mountain communities. Tune in each week for a conversation that explores the ins and outs of buying the perfect mountain home or selling your dream home, and catch a glimpse into the Colorado lifestyle that's a part of you.